The Prime Minister's Rwanda Bill may have survived the vote in the Commons, but this morning Rishi Sunak faces a further threat from MPs who could still vote against the deportation legislation later on.
Despite the second reading winning a majority of 43 votes last night, some of the right-wing members of the party have promised a New Year's showdown to scupper the third reading of the bill if their thoughts are not considered. With us again in the studio, TalkTV's chief political commentator Peter Cardwell and former advisor to Michael Gove, the ever-fantastic Charlie Rowley. We'll start with you, Charlie, because Peter loves the limelight.
Position heal thyself.
Yes, precisely. Come on, Charlie, jump in on it. Lots of talk all day, and Sunak having that breakfast meeting. We had Jonathan Gullis on yesterday morning. In the end, no voting against, but abstentions. But I put this to Peter in the last hour. Is it not fair to say this is a zombie government heading towards oblivion? I mean, he has only succeeded in delaying till the new year the fact that he can't please all the people all the time. This really is, to me, I mean, it says so much about Sunak. It's a zombie government, isn't it, Charlie Rowley?
Well, I think this is a skilled Prime Minister that was able to balance both wings of the Conservative Party and get a vote through where at the start of the morning it looked a pretty difficult day, but he was able to navigate his way through. He saw off that rebellion that actually didn't turn out to be as big as we thought it would be. So in politics, there's always a lot of talk, but it seemed to be a bit too much hype amongst the ERG and those five families, that wings of the Conservative Party on the right of the Conservative Party that we kept hearing about that might vote against or abstain. Turns out that the government won pretty
But it's just kicking it down the road. What I'm saying is that he's set himself up to die on a hill of a policy that almost everybody on all sides of the political spectrum know for different reasons, be it finance, be it morality, be it that it's just I deal with the processing in my humble opinion, but everybody knows it can't work except for our Prime Minister who just carries on willy-nilly, excuse the pun.
Well, I think I have a lot of sympathy with that, because I think, look, there's a lot of money that's gone into the scheme. It hasn't taken off yet, if I can put it like that. But I think what the Prime Minister has to do, and he has to continue with it, because it was one of his top 5 priorities that he set out at the start of the year. And if you remember back in January, when he talked about the 3 on the economy, 1 on the NHS and stopping the boats, everybody sort of, giggled a little bit and said, well, that's you. Of course you're going to achieve that. That's far too easy. You've set the bar too low, and then you'll call an election to say that you've achieved all of these great things, and it's a bit of a gimmick.
He's not going to stop the votes.
I think. Look, you are never going to, in totality, stop people who want to come into this country illegally.
Do you remember Comical Ali in the Iraq War? We have Comical Rowley over here. You're so positive about this. This is a massive crisis for the government.
It is, but it's one that it's navigating its way through, because ultimately, what we're not hearing about is the positives from the government. So, if small boat crossings have come down by a third, that is a fact. There is a 90% return.
But the votes are not stopped.
But you will never, in totality, be able to stop someone, I think, who wants to come into the country.
So why did he choose it?
Stop the boats.
Because ultimately, you're seeing thousands upon thousands of people make that crossing. To stop huge amounts of those people, the overwhelming majority, if there is, a handful in the tens rather than the thousands of people.
Could I be honest? Why would they choose a phrase like stop the boats rather than reduce boat crossings?
Because I think stopping the boats is
aspirational, impossible.
Headline grabbing, and I think much more better to communicate with the public, to say we are stopping the boats. I think people
But you're communicating with the public, but also lying to them.
Well, I think people understand, as an island, there will always be people that come into the country illegally. Every country faces that. You will never be able to stop every single person who wants to break into a country or break a border to do that. But ultimately, it's about reducing the thousands of people that are making that perilous journey. It's about breaking up those criminal gangs. And I think the idea of having Rwanda in place will deter people.
Well, can I just pick you up on that? Because it is really important to get both sides. But if I believed that Rwanda, right, was a deterrent, if I was trying to slip into this country, I'd see the debacle that is the Rwanda policy and come anyway. That's what I would say. And you could well be a politician, really. Is it a zombie government? Answer the question, man.
No, I don't think it is. I think, look, it's gone through a difficult period. There's no doubt about it. It's been very difficult to be a Conservative, and as a supporter, or if you're in the government, or if you're a backbench MP. It's not been plain sailing. It's not being fun.
Back to the boats again.
But you've got to remain optimistic. You've got to remain upbeat. You know, this is a government that won in 2019 on an 80-seat majority. It's got to do things that it said it's going to do, and that's not just about stopping the bows. It's about dealing with the backlog in the NHS. It's about dealing with the backlog in our criminal justice system post-COVID. It's about dealing with the economy to make sure it's growing, that there's the pound in the pocket of people again, and that you're cutting inflation as the government said.
Gotta love him.
And cutting taxes, which will be coming in March.
You cynical old jowly, miserable political nerd, and him still believing,
Listen,
Pete.
I love
Pessimistic Pete.
Yeah, pessimistic Pete, comical Rowley.
Look, Keir Starmer was right yesterday when he said that there's not a lot of governing going on. There's a lot of problems within the Conservative Party. There's a lot of party management problems, but there are some disagreements about ideology. There's the practicality, there's the party management and so on. But if you're in the country, if you're sitting somewhere in perhaps an area that hasn't been levelled up, and you're thinking, we were promised this Rwanda plan, a version of it will happen in some sense, possibly, but maybe not. The political discourse is going to be completely dominated, at least for the next month, if not longer, on this Rwanda plan, probably right up until the next election. This is something, this is a policy Rishi Sunak didn't want, it's an argument he didn't want, and it's going to have to be a manifesto pledge that he didn't want. He is hemmed in.
But you say didn't want. He managed to buy his way into 10 Downing Street with Suella Braverman's support by saying, I'll agree with what you're saying, which to me proves that he doesn't believe in. He did it for his own ends. That's me being really honest with you.
I think you're right, but also he wouldn't be a number 10 otherwise. In politics, you know, if you're not in power, you're not going to do anything, basically. And he would be a backbencher doing nothing, which is what he was during the 49 days of Liz Truss's premiership.
Charlie?
But also, just on that, I think, look, going back to 2019, if you're going to try, however much of a disaster it's been for the Conservatives at the minute, to win the next election, you've got to hold on to the red ball seats. And a lot of those seats were picked up after Brexit, which was all about taking back control of your money, your borders, and your laws. And this plays into taking back control of your borders. And that is why, if you pit Rishi Sunak at the next general election versus Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party, who have voted down every single piece of immigration legislation that's been brought forward, you have a real choice there if you're in a red ball seat. You have a real choice there if you're a Conservative, or if you're thinking about voting reform.
But you can look at what has actually happened over the last 10 years, particularly the most recent few years, where immigration, legal migration, has gone up by 750,000 people. So, you know, you can very well say Labour have voted this down, they've voted down this, but the reality is the Tories have failed on every single key pledge that they've made since that manifesto.
But maybe, Nicola, if Labour had supported them or some sort of consensus could have emerged. Sure. I mean, Keir Starmer at one stage actually referred to all immigration legislation as racist. That's not a helpful, he did. That is not a helpful contribution to the debate.
Can we take it further, though? I brought this up in the last hour. I'd love yours and Charlie's response. Keir Starmer, somewhere yesterday, said they would obviously reverse Rwanda, described it as the Brexit for this government, for Rishi Sunak, but also said that he would process, I'd like your opinion on this, Charlie, people at source, i.e. abroad. We were talking about it before 6. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine. But I think if it could be done, it would be done already. So, but you've got to have better agreements with European countries. You've got to have an understanding with France. Yes, a lot of money's gone into the French government to make sure that they can increase their patrols. Are they doing enough? That's always a question that comes up.
Pay them a lot of money.
But
500 million for what?
They say that the crossings, they say that they prevent nearly half of people coming across.
No, they leave people, and we have the RNLI and the British Navy have to do it.
I'm not going to disagree with you, Jeremy.
But it comes back to I think that's right. But I think the fact when we've got a third of those small boat crossings coming down in the UK, when we're seeing an increase in the migration crisis right across the Mediterranean, as the Prime Minister said out in his press conference, means that things are working.
And in fairness to Rishi Sunak, the boats have been reduced by a third. Is that all to do with his policy? Probably not. It's probably the weather. There are lots of other things. But if you look across Europe, this is a massive crisis for many European countries. Look at what's happening in Italy. We are in, I know this will sound weird, and maybe I'm comical Rowley, comical Cardi, I don't know, but actually the position in this country in terms of people coming across in boats is better than other European countries, and we don't actually say that, and we don't give the government any credit for that.
Moving on to the next phase now, the third reading in January. What's your prediction on how many people could potentially...
All of them.
...abstain or vote against?
So the numbers are fascinating here. So the working majority that the government have is 56. exactly half of that is 28. 29, which
Genius.
is exactly the number of people who abstained yesterday. If all 29 of them vote against, well, then Rishi Sunak loses by 1 vote.
And isn't it also the case that the One Nations, the 100 or so led by that wet Damien Green, have said, we'll agree, but if you go any further to the right, we won't. And the people on the right are going, unless you come towards the right, we won't. It's an impossible joke.
You've got just over 300 Conservative MPs. You've got 100 on the centre leftish bit of the Conservative Party, and as much as that exists, in the One Nation caucus saying, as you correctly say, Jeremy, this far and no further. You've got 100 on the right, around 100, saying we want fundamental change to this bill at the third reading. The only reason that we have either abstained or voted for this is because we want fundamental change. Rishi Sunak is in an impossible position.
Of his own making. He wanted the job. Charlie, yesterday, and this might sound bizarre, we had that theory somebody came out about Farage and Johnson. I want to ask you about another rumour yesterday. We talk about the One Nation Tories, you know, the centrists. Lord David Cameron as a caretaker Prime Minister / leader into the next election. Thoughts?
Sure of the energy.
I don't think he would want that or welcome that. I think he fully supports.
Can't be Prime Minister for the Lords. That's impossible.
But I think I agree with Peter. But the problem stems. I think the reason why it's so difficult for Rishi Sunak is because the problem isn't just something that's occurred. It goes back to successive Conservative Party manifestos, arguably back to David Cameron, who said he wanted to cut migration from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. And since then, there hasn't been an open conversation about migration in general. So I would much rather have a much more robust conversation with people about those particular numbers of legal migrants. A lot of people who actually have come from Ukraine, where we've opened our hearts and our homes to people that were fleeing conflict. A lot of those are students. Do you actually have to recognise those students in those numbers, yes or no? Because a lot of those students do come, and they do get jobs, and they do study, but they do actually go back as well. And a lot of them are healthcare workers as well, where we do need those people in this country.
In fairness to the government and in fairness to James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, they have introduced a huge and quite significant bit of legislation last week. That was on Tuesday. They're trying to get those numbers. He thinks they'll come down by 300,000 at least. That's still far too high. But not, on the legal side, they are attempting to tackle that.
Could sit and watch you two forever. Pessimistic Pete and Chemical Rowley. Thank you very much.
Comical Rowley.
What?
Not chemical.
Comical Rowley.